You don't deserve a single dollar from this house. Derek's voice cut through the probate office like a blade. He sat across from me at the polished conference table, his arms crossed, his expression smug. The lawyer, Mr. Patterson, hadn't even finished his opening remarks when my stepfather decided to make his position clear. I paid for the renovations, he continued, leaning forward. I covered the property taxes for 15 years. I maintained that house while you were off living your life, coming home only when you needed something. Each word felt like a slap. My mother sat beside him, her eyes fixed on her folded hands. She said nothing. She never did when Derek was on a roll. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that the house he was claiming as his own was built on my father's dreams, my father's money, my father's love. But my throat felt tight, and the words wouldn't come. Mr. Patterson adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the stack of papers before him. There is, he said slowly, one additional document that needs to be reviewed before we proceed. Derek's confident smile flickered. Just for a second.
But I saw it.
My name is Natalie Brooks, and I'm 31 years old, originally from a small town in Oregon where everyone knew everyone's business. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to my channel for more fascinating stories like this. You won't regret it. As Mr. Patterson shuffled through his papers, my mind drifted back to the house. The two-story colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. The house where my father used to sit with me on summer evenings, teaching me about constellations. The house where I learned to ride a bike, where I had my first heartbreak, where I said goodbye to him for the last time. That house wasn't just property. It was history. It was every birthday cake baked in that kitchen, every Christmas morning by the fireplace, every late-night conversation where my father promised I'd always be protected. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. Before we discuss distribution, I need to clarify something. Who originally paid the down payment on the property? The question hung in the air. Derek shifted in his seat, and I felt my pulse quicken. My stepfather didn't hesitate. He launched into his prepared speech with the confidence of someone who'd rehearsed it 100 times. I've been the primary financial provider for this family since day one, he declared. When I married Natalie's mother, I took on responsibilities that weren't mine. I paid for Natalie's college expenses, her car insurance, even her wedding 5 years ago. The house wouldn't be standing without my contributions. He gestured dismissively in my direction. She never launched properly. Always coming back, always needing something. I gave, and now she thinks she deserves a piece of what I built. I felt the lawyer's assistant, a young woman named Fiona, glance at me with sympathy. The room seemed to tilt in Derek's favor. Even my mother nodded slightly, as if agreeing with his version of events. My chest tightened. Was I remembering things wrong? Had I constructed a false narrative about my father's legacy? Then Mr. Patterson spoke. May I read something into the record? The room went silent. Mr. Patterson reached for a thin manila folder I hadn't noticed before. It looked old, the edges slightly yellowed. Derek's posture changed instantly. His shoulders tensed, and his eyes fixed on that folder like it was a snake about to strike. My mother looked up for the first time since the meeting started. Her face was pale. This document, Mr. Patterson explained, was filed with our firm 17 years ago. It was never discussed at the time because certain conditions hadn't been met. But given the current circumstances, it's now relevant to these proceedings. He opened the folder carefully. The paper inside looked official, stamped and notarized. I need to note, he continued, that this document predates your marriage to Mrs. Brooks by 2 years. Derek's jaw clenched. 2 years before he even entered our lives. Whatever was in that folder, my father had created it when I was just 14 years old, when he was still healthy, when he was planning for a future he'd never see. Mr. Patterson began to read, and I recognized my father's careful phrasing immediately. The legal language couldn't hide his voice. In the event of my death and subsequent remarriage of my spouse, I hereby establish the following provisions to protect my daughter's inheritance. The property located at 428 Oakwood Drive shall remain in trust, with my daughter Natalie Brooks maintaining beneficial interest regardless of marriage status changes. My father had seen this coming. Somehow he'd known. Derek slammed his hand on the table. That document is irrelevant. The house was jointly owned after the marriage. I have rights. His voice was too loud, too defensive. The confidence from minutes ago had vanished. My heart hammered in my chest. My father had protected me from beyond the grave, anticipating exactly this moment, this betrayal, this fight. Mr. Patterson removed his glasses and looked directly at Derek. Actually, sir, the document is entirely relevant. That's why we're here. Mr. Patterson's tone shifted, becoming formal and unmovable. Based on this trust document, I'm required to pause all asset distribution until we can conduct a thorough review of ownership claims and financial contributions. Derek stood up, so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. You can't do this. We had an agreement. My wife and I discussed everything. The lawyer didn't flinch. No assets from the estate can be transferred until this matter is resolved. That's not a request, Mr. Morrison. That's a legal requirement. I watched Derek's controls slip away like sand through fingers. His face reddened, and a vein pulsed at his temple. He looked like a man who'd just realized he'd been playing a game with rules he didn't know existed. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely audible. Derek, maybe we should just listen. He shot her a look that made her shrink back into her seat. Mr. Patterson gathered his papers. I'm requesting a private follow-up hearing in 2 weeks. Both parties will need to provide documentation of financial contributions to the property. Derek's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I drove home alone, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The afternoon sun felt too bright, the traffic too loud. Everything felt surreal. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. My father had planned for this exact scenario, had seen through whatever charm Derek possessed, had protected me from a future he wouldn't be there to defend me in. I pulled into my apartment complex and sat in the car, trying to process what had just happened. Derek's face when he saw that folder. My mother's silence. The way everything shifted in an instant. Then something clicked in my memory. A conversation with my father from years ago, back when I was 16. We'd been sitting on the porch, watching a storm roll in, and he'd said something strange at the time. If anything ever happens to me, there are things you need to know. Things you need to remember. I'd laughed it off then. He was only 47, healthy, active. Now I understood. He'd been preparing me. The memory became clearer as I sat there. My father had taken me into his study that night after the storm passed. He'd pulled out a small brass key from his desk drawer. This key, he'd said, holding it up to the lamplight, opens something important. If things ever go wrong, if you ever feel like you're being pushed out or forgotten, use this. I'd asked him what it opened, but he just smiled. You'll know when the time comes. Keep it somewhere safe. I'd put it in my jewelry box and forgotten about it for years. After he died, after Derek moved in and started changing things, I'd packed away most of my childhood belongings. The key had gone with them. My heart raced. I still had it. In a box in my closet, mixed with old birthday cards and high school photos. I rushed into my apartment, practically running to my bedroom. I pulled down the box and dumped everything onto my bed. There, among the memories, was the brass key. It felt heavier than I remembered. The next morning, I drove to the house. My mother was at work, and Derek would be gone until evening. I let myself in with my old key, the one Derek had repeatedly asked me to return. The study looked different now. Derek had moved in his own furniture, replaced my father's bookshelves with a massive television. But the built-in cabinets remained, the ones my father had custom-made when they first bought the house. I went to the bottom drawer of the left cabinet, the one that had always stuck slightly. The brass key slid into the lock perfectly. Inside was a fireproof box I'd never seen before. My hands shook as I lifted it out. It was heavier than expected. When I opened it, I found folders organized by year, each labeled in my father's neat handwriting. Mortgage statements, property tax receipts, renovation records. Every document showed his name, his money, his investment. At the bottom was a sealed envelope with my name written across it in blue ink. My father's handwriting, waiting for me. I sat on the floor of the study and opened the envelope with shaking hands. The letter was dated 3 weeks before my father died. He must have known something was wrong, must have felt his time running short. My dearest Natalie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and something has gone wrong with the house. I'm sorry you're dealing with this. I tried to set things up so you'd never have to fight for what's rightfully yours. The house is protected in a trust. Your mother has life estate rights, but the property itself belongs to you upon her passing or remarriage. I did this because I love you both, but I also know that life can be complicated after someone dies. Derek pushed hard to be included in financial decisions after we got engaged. I never trusted him completely. There's something off about a man who asks about assets before he asks about my daughter's happiness. If he's fighting you on this, the documents in this box prove everything. The down payment, every mortgage payment, every improvement. It's all mine, which means it's yours. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't deserve this. You deserve everything. Love always, Dad. I held the letter to my chest and cried. That evening, Derek called me. His voice was different, lighter, almost friendly. Natalie, I think we got off on the wrong foot at that meeting. This whole legal thing is just stressful for everyone. Why don't you come over for dinner? Your mother misses you. The shift was jarring. Yesterday, he declared I deserved nothing. Today, he wanted family dinner. I think we can work something out, he continued. No need for lawyers and courts. We're family, right? We can settle this privately. I agreed to come, curiosity overriding my caution. Dinner was uncomfortable. Derek was too cheerful, too attentive. He kept refilling my water glass, asking about my job, complimenting my hair. My mother looked relieved, probably hoping we could move past the conflict. After dessert, Derek slid a folder across the table. I had my lawyer draw this up. Just a simple agreement that gives you a fair settlement and lets us avoid a messy court battle. He smiled. Just sign it, and we can all move on. I took the folder home, telling Derek I wanted to review it carefully. He didn't like that, but he couldn't exactly refuse. Back at my apartment, I read through every page. The language was dense, full of legal terms designed to confuse. But I caught it on page 7, buried in a paragraph about mutual release of claims. By signing, I would acknowledge that Derek had been the primary financial contributor to the household and that any inheritance claims were voluntarily waived in exchange for a one-time payment of $20,000. $20,000 for a house worth over $400,000. The paragraph also included a clause stating I acknowledged receiving substantial financial support throughout my adult life and considered all obligations fulfilled. He tried to get me to sign away everything in exchange for almost nothing, wrapped up in language about family harmony and avoiding court costs. I called Mr. Patterson the next morning. I declined the offer and told him my lawyer would respond to any future communications. Derek wasn't going to trick me. Derek's friendly mask shattered the moment he got Mr. Patterson's response. He called me screaming, his voice so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. You ungrateful brat. After everything I did for you, this is how you repay me? I fed you, housed you, paid for your education. I stayed calm. My father paid for my education. The college fund was set up before you ever met my mother. He ignored that. You're just greedy. You want to take everything from your own mother, leave her with nothing. The accusation stung because I knew it wasn't true. My mother would keep her life estate. She could live in the house until she chose to leave. I'll drag this out for years, Derek threatened. I'll make sure you spend every penny on legal fees. You'll regret this. I hung up. That evening my mother called. Her voice was small, defeated. Natalie, please. Can't you just let this go? Derek is so upset. It's causing problems between us. I realized then that she was financially dependent on him. Completely. Mr. Patterson called me into his office 3 days later. He had news. Your father's original attorney, he explained, kept detailed records of every interaction with Derek after your father's diagnosis. There are notes documenting Derek's attempts to be added to the title, his requests for financial information, his pressure on your mother to change the will. He slid a file across his desk. Your father specifically instructed his attorney to note any interference. It's all here. I read through the notes. Derek had started asking about the house 6 months after the engagement. He'd wanted to know about insurance policies, retirement accounts, property values. My father had documented every conversation. This establishes a pattern, Mr. Patterson said. It shows intent to claim assets that weren't his. The evidence was damning. Derek hadn't just made a mistake or misunderstood the situation. He'd been planning this from the beginning. The second hearing felt different. Derek arrived without his earlier confidence. He sat stiffly, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding mine. Mr. Patterson presented the evidence methodically. The trust document, the financial records, the attorney's notes, each piece built on the last, creating an undeniable picture. Derek's lawyer tried to argue that joint property laws superseded the trust, but Mr. Patterson was ready. The trust was established before the marriage and explicitly protected against such claims. Then Mr. Patterson introduced the financial records Derek had claimed didn't exist. Bank statements showing my father's mortgage payments. Receipts for renovations paid in full before Derek entered the picture. Tax documents with only my father's name. Derek had claimed he'd paid for everything. The records proved he'd paid for almost nothing. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked over her glasses at Derek. These are substantial discrepancies, Mr. Morrison. Derek's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Derek's face grew redder. Derek's testimony fell apart under basic questioning. He claimed he'd paid for a new roof in 2014, but the record showed my father had replaced the roof in 2011, 3 years before Derek married my mother. He insisted he'd covered property taxes for 15 years, but the tax records only showed his name for the past 7 years, and even then, the payments came from my mother's account, which was funded by my father's life insurance. Every claim unraveled. Every statement contradicted the evidence. The judge's expression shifted from neutral to skeptical to openly doubtful. Mr. Morrison, she said finally, your testimony is inconsistent with the documented evidence. I'm ordering a complete forensic review of the estate to determine actual financial contributions. Derek's lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised her hand. This isn't optional. We'll reconvene when the review is complete. Derek stood up, nearly knocking over his chair. This is ridiculous. I'm being persecuted for trying to protect my wife's interests. The judge's eyes narrowed. Sit down, Mr. Morrison. He sat. The waiting period was excruciating. Weeks dragged by while forensic accountants pored over every financial record. Derek became increasingly desperate, calling my mother multiple times a day, trying to control the narrative. He started showing up at my workplace, standing in the parking lot, watching. Not threatening, just watching. It was unsettling enough that my boss suggested I vary my schedule. My mother called less frequently, but when she did, her voice sounded strained. Derek was pressuring her to convince me to drop everything, to accept whatever scraps he was willing to offer. He says you're tearing the family apart, she told me one night. He says your father would be ashamed of you. That hurt more than Derek's threats. But I remembered my father's letter, his words about not letting anyone tell me I didn't deserve this. Finally, Mr. Patterson called. The forensic report is finished. We have a court date next week. His tone told me everything I needed to know. The evidence was on my side. The forensic report was devastating for Derek. Page after page confirmed what I already knew. My father had funded the house entirely. The down payment, every mortgage payment, major renovations, property tax payments before the marriage. All of it came from my father's income and savings. Derek's contributions amounted to routine maintenance and utilities during the marriage. Nothing that would give him ownership claim. The trust document was valid and enforceable. My father had structured it specifically to protect my inheritance while allowing my mother to live in the house. The accountant testified that Derek's claims of financial support were exaggerated or entirely false. The college fund Derek claimed to have paid into had been fully funded by my father before his death. The judge reviewed the report silently, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up. Based on this evidence, I'm prepared to make a ruling. Final judgment will be issued Friday at 2 p.m. Derek's lawyer requested a delay. The judge denied it. 3 days. In 3 days, this would finally be over. The night before the final judgment, my phone rang at 11 p.m. Derek's number appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. His voice was different again. Not angry, not friendly. Defeated. "Natalie," he said quietly. "I know I messed up. I know I said things I shouldn't have. But we can still fix this." He paused, and I heard him take a breath. "I'll give you $50,000 to walk away. Cash. Tomorrow. Before the judge makes her ruling." $50,000. More than his previous offer, but still a fraction of what the house was worth. "You can use it for whatever you want," he continued. "Start fresh. No more fighting, no more lawyers. Just take the money and let this go." I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "No. Natalie, please. My father left me that house," I said. "Not the money from selling it for less than it's worth. The house. His house. And I'm not walking away." I hung up before he could respond. The courtroom was smaller than I expected for such an important moment. The judge entered, and we all stood. When we sat down, she began reading her decision without preamble. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, this court finds that the property at 428 Oakwood Drive is held in trust for Natalie Brooks as established by her late father. The trust is valid and enforceable. Derek's face went gray. The court orders the property to be sold, with proceeds distributed according to the trust terms. Mrs. Brooks retains right of first refusal to purchase the property at market value. If she declines, the property will be listed for sale. My mother's eyes widened. She couldn't afford to buy the house. Furthermore, the court finds Mr. Morrison's claims of financial contribution to be largely without merit. His claims of ownership are denied. The judge looked directly at Derek. "Mr. Morrison, your testimony contained numerous false statements. While I'm not pursuing perjury charges at this time, I strongly advise you to be more truthful in future legal proceedings." It was over. I'd won. The aftermath came swiftly. Derek had to pay his legal fees, which had mounted significantly. The forensic review alone cost him thousands. Combined with the court's findings against him, his financial position weakened dramatically. More importantly, his authority in the house collapsed. My mother saw him differently now. The lies he'd told, the documents he'd tried to hide, the way he'd manipulated her into believing his version of events. She started asking questions. About finances, about decisions he'd made, about where money had actually gone over the years. I watched from a distance as their relationship cracked under the weight of exposed deceptions. 3 weeks after the judgment, my mother called me. "I'm leaving him," she said simply. "I can't trust him anymore." I didn't ask her to do that. I didn't demand she choose sides. But she'd made her choice anyway. Derek had lost more than money in that courtroom. He'd lost his credibility, his marriage, and his control over the narrative he'd built so carefully. The house sale process began in April. Professional movers came to box up decades of memories. I supervised, making sure nothing of my father's was discarded or given away carelessly. Derek moved out 2 weeks before the sale closed. He took his belongings in a rental truck, no dramatic scenes, no final confrontation. Just a quiet exit from a house that was never really his. I found things I'd forgotten existed. My father's college textbooks, still annotated in his handwriting. Photo albums from before I was born. His tool collection in the garage, each tool labeled with masking tape. In the back of his closet, behind boxes my mother hadn't touched, I found a small wooden box. Inside was a pocket watch that had belonged to my grandfather, my father's father. I'd never seen it before. Tucked beneath the watch was a note card. For Natalie, when she needs to remember that time always reveals the truth. My father had left me one last gift, one last reminder that he'd been thinking of me. The final item I found was in the attic. A sealed envelope taped to the underside of a floorboard beneath the insulation. I only discovered it because I was checking for any forgotten storage. The envelope had yellowed with age, but my name was still clearly visible. Inside was a simple note. I knew you'd handle this the right way. Trust yourself. Trust the plan. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Below that, he'd written, "You were never just there. You were always the point." I sat in the empty attic and cried, not from sadness, but from release. The anger I'd carried for months, the stress of fighting Derek, the guilt over my mother's situation, it all lifted. My father had known. He'd prepared me. He'd given me the tools I needed. The house sale closed on a Tuesday in late May. The transaction was smooth, professional, exactly as it should have been. I received my inheritance. Derek received nothing. My mother found a small apartment near her sister. She seemed lighter somehow, freed from Derek's influence. We met for coffee weekly, slowly rebuilding what his presence had damaged. Derek moved to another state. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd tried to claim I'd stolen from him, but no one believed him. The court records were public, and the truth was documented. There was no dramatic apology from him, no moment of recognition where he acknowledged his wrongs. Just reality settling into place, consequences following actions. I invested the inheritance carefully, following my father's example of planning for the future. Part of it went into a trust of my own, protection for my own potential children. The rest I used to start fresh. New apartment, new opportunities, new freedom from fighting battles my father had already won for me. Derek had tried to erase me from the family legacy, to paint me as ungrateful and undeserving. Instead, his lies became his undoing. I was never just there, taking up space in someone else's story. I was my father's daughter, protected by his foresight and his love. The house is gone now, sold to a young family with 2 small children. I drive by sometimes and see toys in the yard, lights in the windows. It's living again, breathing with new memories. My future isn't tied to that property anymore. It's built on the foundation my father laid, reinforced by the strength I found fighting for what was mine. Derek tried to erase me from the past, to rewrite history with himself as the hero and me as the burden. Instead, he funded my future. Every legal fee he paid, every lie he told that fell apart, every moment his mask slipped, it all led here. I own a small house now, one that's entirely mine. The brass key my father gave me sits in a shadow box on my wall, a reminder that protection comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes I think about Derek, diminished and distant, living with the consequences of his choices. I don't hate him anymore. I don't feel anything toward him at all. He was just an obstacle my father had already planned around. The house is gone. My future isn't.